Obviously, there is no announcement today. And in fact, if you look at the language of the 2014 National Defense Authorization Act, it specifically prohibits spending any dollars in that direction. But I believe all of our federal leaders understand that ultimately there is a need for base realignment closure. I will tell you that we should not fear a BRAC, but we ought to embrace a BRAC. This base has grown in 1995 and 2005, and if we continue to do the things that we need to, both inside the base and in a community, we will be positioned again to be ready for that to happen. And so part of that is preparation, and I believe we ought to be doing all that we can today to prepare for what ultimately will come most likely in 2017. Slide, please. For 2014, the message will change somewhat slightly, and Chrissy's already talked about this. But very simply, it is to think differently. Because the time is now, and ultimately, the choice of whether or not we do that is ours. What does think differently mean? It means we take a different approach to union management relationships that we've had over the years. And we're already seeing that. It means that on the base, the processes that have been in place for years need to be tweaked to make us a little bit more effective in our performance. And we need to embrace that rather than fight it. It means outside the fence that instead of being the quiet, confident, proud folks that we are for all the number of things that are going extremely well, we get a little bit loud. We make sure that people in Washington, D.C. understand that we're kicking butt in Houston County when it comes to education. And that we are darn proud of what it is that we're doing, which isn't necessarily in our DNA to do so. And it means in those areas where we can make some improvements, that we acknowledge what we're trying to do is make our community and our region better, that we embrace those opportunities and work together to make them a reality. It's our choice. We've got a copy of the test. We know what the questions are going to be that are going to get asked. It's very simply whether or not we want to prepare and do what's necessary to ensure that as we get to the next BRAC, we have the ability to bring new mission here and be proud of those results. That's where we're focused in 2014. All of you who are sitting here today already get it. You wouldn't be here if you don't. You'll be part of that, and I would ask you to aggressively help us communicate that to others. Enhancing the military value of Robins Air Force Base. We've done that for many years. And those that came before us in the partnership were tremendously successful at making that happen. But in the times that we have today, we've got to look beyond that and understand that our responsibility as well is to help the resiliency of this community. And we're proud to partner with all of you, our elected officials and business leaders, to help make that happen. Because ultimately, what we want to do 10 years from now is be able to say that even in the toughest times, we made the base in this community just a little bit better. Are there any questions that I can answer about what it is that we're doing, or where we're headed, or where we've been? Jack?
First of all, I think I speak for many. We appreciate what you and Chrissy and Judy are doing. I have a couple of questions. What is the progress of our encroachment improvements?
Great question. I will tell you When you talk about where we put gold stars, one of the areas, because of the foresighted efforts of a lot of folks, and I'll single out one, Chairman Stoniker sitting back there, but it wasn't just his efforts, but under his leadership, we have made tremendous progress. First of all, we have fully funded or sourced the funding for solving 100% of our encroachment issue. We are today somewhere over 50%, either measured by acres. There's about roughly 1,600 acres that we need to procure to eliminate the issue. And in terms of parcels, and I think it's 240 parcels, we're over halfway either way that you measure it. Plus there are dollars and there's activities going on today that we're in the midst of procuring additional land. Our goal and the expectation right now is that when we get to the end of 2014, encroachment will not be discussed anymore because the issue will be solved. So tremendous progress there.
Second, how do we stand on clean air and transportation?
Let me start with clean air. 10 years ago, we had some significant issues in two primary areas, ozone and particulate matter. And why that matters is because if you have air quality issues, and the state of California can tell you this in spades, if you have air quality issues, there are limitations in bringing new business, in particular industrial type business, to a location because it compounds an issue that already exists. And so Clean Air Coalition was put in place about a decade ago. And as an indication of the success that they have accomplished in that decade, today there are no ozone issues throughout middle Georgia in terms of impacting where we are. Houston County is in attainment, Bibb County is in attainment, and the region around us is in attainment. When we talk about particulate matter, Houston County is in attainment. Currently, Bibb County is not, but they've improved their performance to the point that we've actually gone back at the state level to the Environmental Protection Agency and asked for a reconsideration that because the air quality is now improved to the point that it ought to be in attainment. So great news story there. I think that's going to be a second gold star for us as we move forward throughout 2014. We know that new standards will come out for air quality. It will allow us some period of time, and I think but those new standards won't be in effect and won't be complied or required to be complied with until probably after 2017. So it's against the standards that we have today, and I think this year we'll see that any air quality issues that we have by EPA standard will have disappeared as well. So both of those are great news stories. Transportation. I look at this as an opportunity. Clearly we have a tremendous infrastructure for roads around here, and that's only going to continue to get better. I-16, I-75, the great work that's happening on 96 right now to be a horizontal connector across those two major interstates, which will be predominantly a 4-lane highway across. That'll be a great news story. The work that's being done on Sardis Church Road, some of the work that's been done on 247. So we've got a great infrastructure in terms of roads and highways. When you think about seaports, there are 4 major seaports that are within 4.5 hours of Robins Air Force Base in Middle Georgia. Great opportunity for us not only to support the base, but for economic development, especially with the expansion of Savannah Harbor and the things that are happening there to make that a super port to support the very largest of ships that will come through the Panama Canal. Rail, tremendous rail capability. The only gap right now is the fact that we don't have a spur that goes into the base, and if we needed one, that would be easy to build. But again, tremendous infrastructure there that we all ought to be proud of. One of the areas that we took a hit in the studies that were done, and the studies gave us exactly what we wanted as a starting point, is a discussion about airports. And clearly today, Middle Georgia Regional does not support a lot of commercial traffic. Passenger traffic. We've got Civil Airways, which is doing a great job, but that's just one element. What I would tell you, and all the folks in this room know this though, that if you want to fly anywhere in the world's largest airport is an hour and a half. For some of you who I've seen drive, maybe a little less, but an hour and a half up the road. And so when I described this, if you were hypothetically in Jacksonville and you wanted to fly somewhere, you would drive across Jacksonville to get to the airport, about 30 minutes, wait an hour for your airplane, fly to Atlanta, wait another hour for your airplane, and then fly to where you want to be. Or you'd come out of Middle Georgia, drive your 90 minutes up there, get to the airplane and take off, and in reality it's probably quicker to get to where you want to be from here than it is there. And so that's just part of the way we tell the story. The final element of this is public transportation. I commend Chairman Stoniker and the 3 mayors in Houston County that they've begun conversations on this. We've been working with the Macon Transit Authority, putting together a proposal that we'll take to Chairman Stoniker and the mayors sometime after the first of the year that looks at what is the art of the possible in terms of a very small public transportation capability. Part of the concern there is that for the decision makers that come out of Washington, D.C., they may not necessarily understand our environment and what's needed here. They do know and they do believe that public transportation is important. Many of them, everywhere they go on the Metro. They go to work on the Metro. They go to the store on the Metro. They go to church on the Metro. And what we have here is a little bit in a different environment. I would tell you though, and this goes back to this idea of thinking differently, we've proven this past year with the Bird that people in our community are willing to take public transportation. We've seen continuous growth of the Bird that goes into Macon Transit Authority, that goes into Robins Air Force Base each and every day, and the amount of traffic that utilize that has grown throughout the entire year. And so we know that people are willing to do that. I'd love to be able to see public transportation get to Dr. Allen's area and be able to move folks who otherwise couldn't go to school. This is an opportunity. But it has to be economical and it has to make sense for this area. And so what we're trying to do is build a story and an opportunity that says this is the way it looks, and hopefully over the next 30 to 60 days we'll be able to present something that makes sense, and I think that will be just another feather in our cap. Long answer to some very good questions.
Any access, southeastern access to the base?
Question, thanks Mr. Lowe, on the question about alternate access to the base from the east side. When we began talking, and first is a little bit of the history, when we began talking about that 2.5, 3 years ago, the reason we wanted to do that was that we had just seen the announcement as part of the 2005 BRAC that we were going to have a strategic distribution hub by Defense Logistics Agency here at Robins. And with things ramping up with Afghanistan, what our anticipation was that we would see a dramatic growth in the amount of trucks that were coming in and out of the base, both bringing stuff in, watching it cross-loaded, and then depart the base headed for one of the ports. The reality is that traffic never did generate to the levels that we thought, and as things continue to draw down, that level has continued to decrease. Now, are there times in 247 where there's an issue? The answer is absolutely, but not near to the level that we wanted. So I think we have a plan in place. Great work by our community leaders and elected officials working with Georgia Department of Transportation to understand what that would look like. But right now, for 2 reasons. One, because the traffic's not there. And secondly, even if we built something to the gate, I'm not sure the Department of Defense today could fund putting an alternate gate in on the base and spending the dollars there. I don't see that happening at least in the next 12 and perhaps 24 months. But it's not something that we've taken off for all the good work that's been done. Great question, sir. Chet?
I know Congress is supportive of multi-service analysis of logistics centers. What in DOD is the attitude?
In fact, I read an article this morning that Congress is asking that question of the Department of Defense to go back and assess. We've created what are called joint bases all throughout the Department of Defense that will look, trying to understand what the benefit of that is. Specifically in the industrial capacity, we've been talking with the Georgia delegation. There's some great leadership from both of our senators as well as from Congressman Scott. In fact, when Congressman Scott was up in North Macon earlier in the week, his comment was, if we do a tremendous job of repairing Air Force C-130s here, why wouldn't we want to do Navy or Coast Guard C-130s? And the answer is we would, and can we find the efficiencies that we want to do and across the department to do that? My sense is, informally, that there are many within the Department of Defense who are willing to look at that. Clearly, the four respective services are somewhat parochial in their view. They want Air Force people doing Air Force work. But the reality is we're already doing a lot of multi-service work in all our industrial complexes. If you went to Jacksonville, you would find out that they're doing work on Air Force A-10 engines, the TF-34. That's where the work is done. If you go to Tinker in terms of engine work, you'd see that some of that. And if you go out to Hill Air Force Base, you'll see Navy and Coast Guard C-130s there. So some of this is taking place. The question is, can we increase that amount of work? And the answer is absolutely. And in an upcoming BRAC, if we can do that, why would you not holistically look, instead of service by service, but across the entire industrial complex? And instead of having for the Air Force a denominator of 3 bases, so a denominator of 3, you look across 13 bases, and I will tell you that we would compete very well in that environment. So part of that presence that I talked about earlier is to make sure that not only with our members of Congress, but also in the Department of Defense, we're going to underscore that point. Great question. Kathy?
You have referred several times to 2017 accomplishing things. Is that because your best guess is that would be when there might be another BRAC?
That is, and there's nothing out there written that is Bob McMahon's
Yeah, it makes
best
sense
guess.
with elections.
But when you look at the structure, you look at what will have settled down, what will have cleared out by then, and understand what those impacts are. Our best guess is 2017. Jimmy?
Would you have any lessons learned for any of us from current events? The two that I paid attention to over the last several weeks were the placement of the F-35s, the one to Hill, the one to Burlington, Vermont. In Burlington, it appears that there's public discord, discontent, protesters, which continues, and that kind of goes against, I'm like, well, they didn't even want it, why would they put it there? Obviously, the geography has something to do with it. Any lesson to learn from that about dealing with the full opposite of having protests about we don't want it? And the other one, I guess, that struck me was that Salt Lake City is, that county is under air quality issues right now, closed down for air quality, and yet can we learn anything from that? It's mostly opinion, but is there anything we need to learn?
Both good questions. Let me start with the F-35 for Burlington. A national discussion about a local issue. And I think for all of us, the message from Burlington is that if we're going to be unhappy about something, we ought to do it privately. If we say we don't want a mission, I mean, clearly the folks in Washington are tremendously aware that there is a major faction there, and this discussion isn't over for them as far as I'm concerned. I mean, and you're talking about major investment in terms of military construction, which is jobs, plus ensuring the future of the base. The reality is that we ought to take from that the ability to effectively communicate that we're happy to bring to Middle Georgia any mission that anyone wants to bring here, and clearly not present any other image. Because once you get that perception that you don't want a mission, that's hard to get rid of. Second question is a much more difficult question, and I don't know the answer to it. When you look at the Utah area, there are air quality issues, and yet the determination that was made that we're going to swap out the F-16s in the fighter wing at Hill Air Force Base and ultimately bring in F-35s, which equates to a lot of military construction for new facilities there as well. And so one of the things that we've asked our congressional delegation to do is not necessarily to try to change that decision, because understanding how important having that flying capability at Hill is with the Utah Test and Training Range there, I get that part. But I'd like to understand the rules, because as I understand the rules, this doesn't make sense to me. And so to go back to the Air Force and say, help us understand what the logic was. If you say this is important, yet we see this, help us understand that. So that's part of the process. And again, it's not to try to overturn something, but it's simply to better understand what those rules are. And I want everybody to play by the same rules. Thanks for the question. Anything else? Okay, with my host hat off, thank you, General McMahon, for your comments. Any old or new business? 2013 was a tremendously challenging year for the partnership, for this community, and for the men and women that work at Robins Air Force Base. I will tell you, and I sat with George McCandless earlier this week in a United Way meeting, and we talked about participation in the Combined Federal Campaign, which is our federal workers helping those throughout our community and throughout our nation. And the results for our Combined Federal Campaign and those throughout all of our military installations were down significantly this year. And I think that's a reflection that those within our installations, and in particular those that are predominantly civilians, who have been adversely affected, not just this year, but are now in their third year of not receiving a pay raise and a variety of different factors, are somewhat disappointed by the way they believe their government has supported them. And so I think it's incumbent upon all of us to share with those that work at the base that we're still tremendously proud of them. The fact that we expect to see a 1% pay increase for our civilians this year ought to say that we've not lost faith, and they shouldn't believe that we've lost faith with them, and that we have this opportunity in 2014 to rekindle that relationship that we've always had, to make sure that they know they're important not only to our national defense, but to the future of this community. And so we should never miss that opportunity, and I think it's incumbent upon all of us to be able to help communicate that to this workforce. And whether they're white collar, blue collar, military, civilian, or contractor, they're an integral part of our nation's defense, and they're integral to the future and the success of this community. And so if you would help me in this season be able to let them know how thankful we are for them being here and all that they do for us. Again, to all of you, a very happy holiday season. Thank you for coming out. And with that, our meeting is adjourned. So what time I did that? 10:59:58. Mine's on.
Hi, love. Mamacita. How you? That's my baby girl. Oh, you guys see some pics?